the Cityscape Bar in the Holiday Inn Mart Plaza, Chicago, I'm Natasha Korecki, and this is Off Message. It's December 2014, so we're going to be looking back at some of the most significant stories of the year and some of the biggest political stories, the most underreported political stories, some winners and losers, and other political shenanigans of the year. So why don't we start with the biggest political story of 2014, Laura Washington? What do you think that is?
Well, Natasha, I think everyone will agree that one of the biggest is Bruce Rauner being elected governor.
This is your victory!
This has been a long time coming. I don't think there's ever been a super wealthy candidate elected governor of Illinois. A lot of people were writing him off because of the wealth.
Right.
A lot of people were talking about
and
Pat Quinn would be able to Romneyize him and use his wealth as an issue, and it didn't work.
And why didn't it work?
I think that it didn't work partly because of who he was going against, partly because he did use his wealth to get his message out and to really, in many ways, go around the media. But a lot of this election was lost by Pat Quinn. He lacked really united support from Democrats, didn't get the turnout that he needed and that he was hoping for, and that he also spent heavily to get, particularly in the city of Chicago and in the
I think there was a real lack of enthusiasm. What I've been hearing over and over again from voters is like, I like the guy, I had to vote for him, but I had to hold my nose. That's not a base that gets you very far.
Let's turn to one of the other major stories of the year, and that would be Karen Lewis, her illness, and dropping out of the mayoral contention. In that case, you had a poll, and that sort of propelled Karen Lewis. You know, this was early on when people weren't necessarily taking her seriously, and here we had a poll saying that she would do better than Rahm Emanuel. Would you say that that was one of those that really put her on the big screen?
Yeah, certainly she wanted to advertise that as broadly as possible, and I think it buoyed her and pushed her in that direction. We say that the biggest story is that she dropped out, but remember, within the space of a few months, really in the middle or latter part of the year, she got into it almost and then got out because of health concerns. I think it's been the most dramatic story, although I can't say that it measures up in significance to the Republicans taking over the governor's mansion, at least for the first time.
So that's your top, that would be your top pick, Bruce Rauner?
I still have Bruce Rauner, but I do think that Karen Lewis was the most dramatic and compelling story. Her profile was the highest. I thought she was the best chance, outside of Tony Preckwinkle, of course, for a candidate to come from the left of Rahm Emanuel. And of course, many people would say it's not hard to get to the left of him because he's so far.
A lot of room there. And don't forget, Karen Lewis continues to have influence even though she's dropped out. She's the one that convinced Chuy Garcia to get into the race.
I'm throwing my full support behind Jesus Chuy Garcia.
Pretty much the last minute, because she wanted to have a standard bearer and she wanted somebody to continue to push her issues. So don't count her out. She's out there.
Well, let's turn to winners and losers. So that kind of melds in with who is one of the winners of 2014, and I guess we would all probably nominate Bruce Rauner, right?
And the Republican Party, because the Republican Party in Illinois has been mired in not being able to get away from its conservative base and electing folks that were too far to the right to be electable to higher office. Rauner is trying to reorganize. He put a lot of cash into a lot of Republican campaigns. This way around, that's going to give him a lot of power and influence down the road.
Yeah, but if the cash is all essentially coming from him or his supporters, I think his future is not dependent on how he can revitalize the Republican Party apparatus, but rather how he can make some deals with people in the Democratic Party that are not always that loyal to the historic Democratic bases, like the unions, for instance. I think Mike Madigan has shown in the last few years that he's willing to deviate from some of the traditional constituencies, and maybe he'll make some deals with Bruce Rauner here.
You mentioned
that won't be to the benefit of those unions.
You mentioned unions, so would we say that unions are the losers in 2014? Did they lose?
Oh yeah, I hadn't thought about that, but it was a bad year for unions. Public employee unions in particular, who we are absolutely sure that Rauner is going to make a move on. Private unions, you know, we're just going to have to wait and see quite what he's got up his sleeve.
But certainly, you know, they bet on Pat Quinn. They spent heavily on him.
And they did that not so much because they were crazy about Pat Quinn. They've had their difficulties with him, but because they were terrified of Rauner, because he pretty much declared war on them early on.
Right, and, you know, Karen Lewis ended up dropping out, so you know, you could say that unions lost. You look
Possibly,
skeptical.
But no, actually, I think it might have been a triple whammy of Lewis not being able to run, Rauner winning, and also remember there was a court case at the Supreme Court where the unions lost. It stemmed out of a case here in Illinois, and I think it could have dramatic consequences for political power of unions, which, you know, SEIU has been, I think, over the last 10 to 15 years, the single biggest spender in political races in the state, probably eclipsed only by Rauner personally.
Okay, well, let's turn to other winners. We say Bruce Rauner, Rahm Emanuel.
Well, Rahm Emanuel, he's got a big race ahead of him. I know we're not talking about the future right now, but I don't see him being a winner right now. I think he's been very savvy, as we were talking about before, about moving himself to the left and responding to some of the poll numbers, but I think the jury's still out on him.
I guess I would disagree because Karen Lewis was such a threat, and you know, the polling looked good. She was probably the most formidable opponent he could have faced.
No, I actually think Tony Preckwinkle. I agree with you that.
Right. Who was
he
actually
was lucky.
Getting in? Right.
Yeah, so I guess I don't think of a winner as somebody who just lucked out, and I think in
Yeah.
his case he just lucked out.
Okay. Anyone else?
And it was a good year for Tony Preckwinkle, even though she
Certainly.
decided not to run for mayor. Consolidated her power. I think she can do pretty much take the county any way she wants, except for fiscal problems there that, you know, are going to be weighing down everybody in government. Continue.
And can you imagine what a nightmare it would have been for the county if she had decided to step out and run, because it would have been a huge scramble for that seat. And I think one of the main reasons she decided not to is because she had done a lot of hard work reforming county government, and she didn't want to see it go by the wayside, which is probably what would have happened if she'd stepped away.
Yeah, I think she's done generally good work in the sense that their financial situation, I don't think, was quite as daunting as the city or the state. I think she's been able to do it without alienating people as much as Rahm Emanuel has alienated people, and he still has a long way to go.
I want to talk a little bit about underreported stories of the year, what we did not hear enough about. And, you know, I thought it was interesting. I recently read in The Economist, they said it's actually the U.S. economy was doing quite well. But Pat Quinn, for instance, you know, his campaign trying again and again to look at these job numbers. Look, we're doing better. We're doing better.
Minimum wage, minimum wage, minimum wage, minimum wage. You could recite it in your sleep, and it didn't help.
So overreported in that sense.
Yeah, in that sense, but it was. I mean, it was on the ballot as a referendum. It was an important issue. I think that the other issue is long-term unemployment. Folks, there's so many people who've just dropped out of the system and aren't even looking anymore, and those people obviously don't feel any better off.
If I can offer a story that I thought was underreported for a long time, but finally I think I get the sense in the past year has started to be reported, just the gap between the very rich and the very poor, and the effect of the recession much more strongly on the middle class and the working classes than on the very rich. I think the gap has been growing for quite a while, probably for a generation really, since the late 80s if you look at the numbers, and yet I think only recently has there been more emphasis put on it. The consensus is not really built yet on what you have to do about it. You know, some people talked about the minimum wage this year. Other people said that doesn't do anything for a lot of people that might make a little bit more than the minimum wage, but not nearly enough.
You know, I always think that the underreported stories are the big picture stories. And I think of a story like that as being the out-migration of African Americans from the city to the suburbs, to the south, and that led to the school closings. And now, you know, I think underreported probably is what really is happening in those neighborhoods now that they don't have a neighborhood school. You know, I think we follow the kids to the next school, but, you know, what's happening in that neighborhood.
I think
but that's huge political implications.
Absolutely, and that feeds right into the whole 99.1% argument. The high rate of foreclosures, which comes out of this long recession, I think is another thing that you don't really hear a lot about, but how that's impacting neighborhoods, and mostly African American neighborhoods.
With that, let's wrap up with quote of the year.
Of the year. Well, look, I'm going to, you know, I know we should stay local, but my quote is, yes, I have smoked crack cocaine. That's from Toronto Mayor Rob Ford. And, you know, Toronto is a sister city, but more importantly, I think we sort of feel like all the bad things in politics happen here in Chicago, and look at that. You know, it could be uglier.
Toronto used to be like our boring twin, that they would stand in for us at movies, our kind of cleaner, more boring twin, and I've really been jealous of the reporters in Toronto the past year or two.
Okay, Dan.
I like to go with something that comes out of federal trials a lot of times, because I think what's secretly wiretapped is sometimes very revealing of what we kind of know and nobody wants to say. And Derek Smith, caught taking bribes, was a state rep until that point, said, "I effed up."
Well, that sums it up pretty well. Enough said.
Laura Washington.
Dick Durbin said over the summer when Walgreens was looking to move its headquarters to get some tax advantages, he wrote Walgreens CEO and said, "It's the corner of happy and healthy somewhere in the Swiss Alps."
Oh, that's, yeah.
That was a nice
I've forgotten
zinger.
one.
That happy and healthy line, he stole the Walgreens line and threw it back at him, and it worked.
And I'm going to go with one that doesn't need a whole lot of explanation, and that's "I can't breathe."
Yeah.
So, well, thank you very much to our panel, and thank you for watching Off Message 2014 Look Back, and we'll see you next week.